Hello, this is Jumbo Commander, and I have a new deck tech on Meren of Clan Nel Toth. Meren of Clan Nel Toth is super popular. This commander is 2 black-green for a 3/4 legendary human shaman, and whenever another creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. At the beginning of your end step, choose target creature card in your graveyard. If that card's converted mana cost is less than or equal to the number of experience counters you have, return it to the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. Meren. First thing you need in a Meren deck is sacrifice, because you have to get creatures into the graveyard to get those experience counters to get those creatures back again. Let's talk about some of the fundamental and key sacrifice outlets in this deck, starting with our 1-drop Viscera Seer. What's great is that Viscera Seer is instant speed and costs no mana. I know Scry 1 is not a huge amount of value, but trust me, you want these instant speed manaless sack outlets. Let's add to that with Carrion Feeder. Carrion Feeder can get pretty big if you want to start an engine. By the way, the other thing that's important is that Viscera Seer and Carrion Feeder can sacrifice to themselves, so in the early game you can build up Meren and instantly get these guys back onto the battlefield. Moving up the mana chain, Yahenni is an awesome sacrifice outlet. Can't sacrifice himself, but sacrifices for free and at instant speed. Now we get up towards 5 mana, all in black by the way, and we have another super powerful sacrifice outlet, but not at instant speed. Sacrifice a creature, target player discards 2 cards. Oh my gosh. So we kind of see the range here of sacrifice outlets from very little value to a ton of value, and all the flexibility in between. You want plenty of sacrifice outlets, so we're going to cover a lot of them, but some of these are definitely my favorites. Those 4 creatures are very strong sacrifice outlets, but they don't give you a lot of value for your sacrifice. A Scry, a +1/+1 counter. Let's get some sacrifice going where you draw cards. Oh yeah. Evolutionary Leap, Vampiric Rites, and Greater Good all let you sacrifice a creature to draw cards. Oh, they're great. But one thing you have to pay attention to is when there's an activation cost for sacrifice. Evolutionary Leap costs a green to activate. Vampiric Rites costs 1 and a black. Greater Good is by far the best of the 3 because it has a free sacrifice. Now, you might think that paying 1 isn't that big of a deal, and it's not. I like Evolutionary Leap. But you might find that during a game, you end up really crimped on your mana. You want to sacrifice your creatures early to build up those experience counters. You want to play a big threat, but also keep sacrifice up. That's why the free sacrifice outlets are so critical. Greater Good also has another secret mode because you have to discard cards. You can discard the cards you want in your graveyard to get them straight onto the battlefield with your Meren. Oh, Greater Good's just great. All of these altars are free sacrifice outlets for your creatures, and the ones that generate mana are particularly powerful. Let's talk about some land-based sacrifice like High Market. High Market does not enter the battlefield tapped. Thumbs up, and you don't have to pay any mana to sacrifice a creature. Very great card. Downside, colorless mana. Okay. Phyrexian Tower, similar situation. Adds a colorless mana to your mana pool, but then sacrifice a creature to add 2 black to your mana pool. This gives you a little bit of ramp and gives you the sacrifice outlet you need. And the cost of including these into your deck is very low. There are a few other options. Grim Backwoods. This costs 4 and sacrifice a creature to draw a card. This just lets you know how good some of the other sacrifice outlets are. Still could be worth an inclusion, especially if you have a lot of other dual lands, so you're not really worried about your colored mana as much. And finally, we have Meren the Moaning Well. Meren with an I, not Meren with an E. I don't know how you pronounce the difference, but I'm assured that they're different things. So you don't have to feel obligated to include this for flavor reasons. But anyways, this is 3 tap sacrifice a creature. Again, could be a fine include, doesn't come into play tapped. None of these do, which is really great for getting Meren out there fast. Creature engines. the very first thing I want to talk about is the all-star of this deck, the absolute must include. I'm giving you tons of options here, but you need this card. It's Spore Frog. Look at the cute little fungus frog. Oh my gosh, this 1 mana 1/1 says sacrifice Spore Frog, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. It's a Spore Frog. Oh, he is so good, guys. Really good. Okay, so Spore Frog is great because it's a sacrifice outlet that's on a creature. It's instant speed. It's costless. You can do it whenever you want. It's just a threat of a fog that's on the battlefield at all times. And you can easily sacrifice it to build up Meren's experience counters. And you can just keep getting Spore Frog back. Imagine if you had a commander that could fog every turn. You do. You do. This is how versatile Spore Frog is. It belongs in your deck. Trust me. Next up, we have some creatures that also sacrifice themselves. Fleshbag Marauder, Merciless Executioner, and Shriekmaw. All of these are creature removal, and they'll sacrifice themselves, gaining you more experience counters. I might have lied. This next card is better than Spore Frog. It's Secura Tribelder. This Snake Shaman is amazing because it's mana ramp on a creature with a sacrifice outlet built in. It's all of the good things we want. So we can play this early and ramp into Meren, only to get him back again, sacrifice him again, build up that experience counter, get land after land after land, getting him back. Amazing. Yavimaya Elder is a little bit more clunky, and I don't blame him. He's a crazy old man with a wolf and a deer in his helmet. Okay, but he does have a sacrifice outlet built onto him, but it costs 2 mana. But there's a lot of value there. 2 mana, sacrifice him, you like sacrifice, draw a card, and get 2 basics. And it's pretty good. I'll take it. Caustic Caterpillar comes down early and destroys an artifact or an enchantment, and Viridian Zealot does pretty much the same thing, but costs more initial mana. Plus, the Caterpillar's like way cuter. Let's talk about spikes. Spike Feeder might be a little bit more versatile because you can get it into your graveyard quickly by just removing counters and gaining life, but gaining life doesn't get you a lot in Commander. So that's the trade-off we have here. Man, so many of the other sacrifice outlets kill their creatures or get you lands, draw you cards, fog the board. Those are really powerful things that we want. Gaining 4 life, not so much. So a lot of people leave Spike Feeder out. Spike Weaver, on the other hand, can be really powerful because you can remove a +1/+1 counter to fog the board, just like the Spore Frog. But you know what? He's not as good as the Spore Frog, so you could leave the spikes out. But if you happen to be running +1/+1 counter synergies, which I'll talk about later, maybe you'll find some room for some spikes. Let's take a look at those enablers. Satyr Wayfinder is great at dumping some cards into your graveyard, and he's a body that you can recur or just sacrifice for value. Nyx Weaver will get you a lot of value over subsequent turns because at the beginning of your upkeep, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. And if there's a card you really need and maybe you can't get it with Meren, you can exile the Nyx Weaver to get that card into your hand. There's some spell enablers that are very powerful, like Mulch and Grizzly Salvage. These can have a great spot in your deck, but I prefer the cards that are creatures as well because those can synergize with your sack outlets and synergize with Meren. We don't always want every card in our graveyard, we just want specific cards sometimes. So a card like Entomb can get exactly what we want and put it into our graveyard. Or Buried Alive can get 3 creatures into our graveyard, but I prefer Gerard's Orders because it puts 1 card in our graveyard and 1 into our hand, and that can be really powerful. Corpse Connoisseur is excellent because again, it's this effect on a creature. When he enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a creature card and put that card into your graveyard. And he's got Unearth for a little bit of added value. As long as we're throwing stuff in the graveyard, let's talk about a synergy, starting with Filth. As long as Filth is in your graveyard and you control a swamp, creatures you control have Swamp Walk. And if you're running Urborg, you're going to have lots of swamps. And all of your opponents are going to have lots of swamps too, making your team unblockable. Oh, that's filthy. And then continuing the cycle, Brawn gives him Trample, and Genesis, if he's in your graveyard, you can just recur with Genesis as well. No need for Meren. Let's talk about the heart of this deck. This deck revolves around value engines. Meren is all about value, and one of the things I have to mention at the very beginning is Panharmonicon. So many of these cards are going to have enter the battlefield effects, and you can go through and pick your favorites, but I'm going to go through some that fit particularly well with Meren. This is a mid-range, grindy deck, so let's get some card draw going with Harvester of Souls, Grim Haruspex, and Smothering Abomination. These guys are going to be triggered all the time because we're not just trading in combat, we're sacrificing our creatures and getting them back again, and we're getting value off of them over and over again, and let's just draw a card as well. Disciple of Bolas is excellent. It's card draw, it's life gain, and it comes in with a sacrifice outlet as well. Unfortunately, you can't target itself. It's not quite like Extort, but it's very powerful. And let's just put it on a Corpse Augur. Corpse Augur is great. When it dies, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of creature cards in target player's graveyard. And you're gonna have a few creature cards in your graveyard, trust me. We have a new form of card draw in Treasure Keeper. When this guy dies, you get to kind of cascade off the top of your library and cast a spell CMC 3 or less. That's really powerful. I mean, just imagine if you sacrifice him for value. You get to cast another card and you get him back with Meren over and over again. It actually kind of reminds me of Matter Reshaper a little bit. Matter Reshaper does have a restrictive mana cost, but I can see Matter Reshaper being really effective in this deck as well. Let's go simple. Wall of Blossom says draw a card. And Eternal Witness gets a card out of the graveyard. You're going to notice a lot of stuff ends up in the graveyard, so this is pretty close to tutoring on a body. Gaunty has been a favorite inclusion of mine, allowing you to recur him over and over again and annoy your opponents. And Entomber Exarch can get you anything back to your hand. Kind of a Meren-like effect, but not quite as strong. But I like the flexibility of being able to disrupt your opponents. This could be really useful if your opponents are running a lot of non-creature spells that really disrupt your game plan or combo off for them. Sidisi Undead Vizier is a great tutor because it's a sacrifice outlet as well. I love just being able to sacrifice herself too. Gets the experience counters up and gets you exactly what you need. Similarly, Runescar Demon doesn't have that sack outlet, but just gets you whatever you want. We have another great tutor effect with Woodland Bellower. It gets any non-legendary 3-drop or less, so Reclamation Sage, Eternal Witness, Wall of Blossoms, Wood Elves, Spore Frog, Satyr Wayfinder, all of these, okay? It's just great, including Fierce Empath, which can get you the big stuff you need. So with a combination of Woodland Bellower and Fierce Empath, I like the ability to tutor up kind of a toolbox effect, and I'll have it be on creatures as well. We're going to be sending a lot of creatures straight to the graveyard, so why not draw a few cards off of them using Skull Clamp. Another artifact that is just so powerful, so wonderful, so illegal in Modern is Birthing Pod. What a wonderful card. It's a sacrifice outlet. It's a tutor. It's a value machine. Get this card and put it into your deck. You will have so much fun. We have finally left the card draw, card advantage, tutoring, all that mid-rangey stuff to get to another important category, which is ramp. Solemn Simulacrum is great. Get a land on the battlefield, draw a card when you die. Isn't this a wonderful transition between the two categories? You know, ramp, then draw a card. Oh, love it. And also Burnished Heart, which is cool because he has a sacrifice outlet built into him. I think he's a little bit slow. I think it depends on your meta. If If you have enough sack outlets, Viridian Emissary can ramp you really well, along with Veteran Explorer, even though he's a little bit group huggy. I prefer, though, the classic Wood Elves, Farhaven Elf, those ones are great, and then also Nissa is spectacular. Nissa's backside is pretty excellent as well. Let's talk about removal and disruption. How about Rexage, Acidic Slime, Woodfall Primus? Man, that's a good creature to sacrifice. Or Bane of Progress. Does hit some of your own stuff, but man, he's just so powerful. All of these are great examples of removal, and there are more out there, so feel free to find your own favorite pieces of disruption and removal. Remember, we already mentioned Caustic Caterpillar and Viridian Zealot. You don't need like 10 copies of Artifact and Enchantment Destruction, so pick what fits you best. Noxious Gearhulk and Necatrol. There are a lot of effects that kill creatures. I like Noxious Gearhulk because he gains you life. He's got a little bit of evasion. Necatrol is a little bit cheaper, actually quite a bit cheaper, and is pretty classic. Remember that you have a lot of ability to kill creatures that I already mentioned. All of these sacrifice creatures are really powerful as well. More removal that deals with sacrifice: Dictate of Erebos, Grave Pact, Butcher of Malakir. You're going to have a lot of ways to kill creatures, so I wouldn't necessarily focus too much of your deck on just killing creatures, especially if you have a Dictate of Erebos in your deck, or a Butcher of Malakir. Let's talk about threats. Sepulchral Primordial is amazing. He's just a great value for 7 mana. How about Puppeteer Clique? A little bit worse, okay, but is a lot more flexible, especially with Persist and all the sacrifice outlets. I think Puppeteer Clique is an excellent inclusion. Grave Titan is a great threat because it's just an army in a can, and that ETB, well, it can only be surpassed by Avenger of Zendikar, which is an even bigger army in a can, and its ETB puts even more creatures onto the battlefield. More threats. Mazrek Kral Death Priest. Mazrek goes crazy because if you're sacrificing, you're also getting your team bigger and bigger and bigger. Also, if you want to get your team bigger, how about Craterhoof Behemoth? I don't include Craterhoof very often in many of my decks. I do for some of the more competitive ones, but I find that it just is what I win with. And that's boring. I don't want to always be winning with a Craterhoof Behemoth. Hey, this is the deck that just does stuff, then wins with Craterhoof. I don't know. I think in this deck, Mazrek could be way more fun. Alright, so I've talked a little bit about Meren. I talked about her enablers, so the sacrifice outlets, the value engines, but there's so much Golgari. There's so much out there. I'm going to be talking about a few different categories. These are angles that you can go. You can mix and match. You can kind of build your own Meren, which is really cool. And the first up, we have Reanimator. In the Reanimator strategy, we need to get things into the graveyard. We have that in our enablers, but then we use cards like Reanimate or Victimize or Dread Return in order to get those creatures back on the battlefield. But wait a second, you ask, Meren does that for us already. Well, the key is to be reanimating really, really, really big fatties. So that Woodfall Primus I mentioned, Terastodon, Shieldred, crazy big creatures. With Meren and all of the sacrifice enablers, creatures are better than spells in many situations. So Phyrexian Delver and the Shieldred I mentioned can get creatures out of the graveyard and onto the battlefield while being able to be recurred themselves. Let's talk about a dredge strategy. When talking about dredge, we have to talk about two of the best dredgers, Golgari Grave Troll and Stinkweed Imp. Not to mention an awesome dredging land, Dakmor Salvage. Usually dredge strategies are really good at getting stuff into your graveyard. A lot of times you can get a Necrotic Ooze combo or something like that, or you could just value dredge. That's totally okay too. Here's that combo I mentioned. Necrotic Ooze has all the activated abilities of cards in your graveyard. So if you have the Phyrexian Devourer and Triskelion in your graveyard, they become a super crazy creature. The Devourer can remove cards from the top of your graveyard, getting tons of +1/+1 counters. And the Devourer will die, but you can make him super, super big before he dies. And then with Triskelion, you can take all of those counters off to deal damage to your opponents, essentially killing them in one instant speed flurry of +1/+1 counters. Now, Necrotic Ooze combo doesn't have to go in a dredge strategy, but it fits kind of nicely because you need these cards in your graveyard, and what better way to get them in there than to dredge? Another element to the dredge strategy could be a Gerard and Lord of Extinction sort of combo, allowing you to get tons of stuff into your graveyard and then, boom, destroy the field. If we're sacrificing things all over the place, let's slowly drain our opponent out with all of the value we're gaining. The best way to drain your opponent out is with 1,000 tiny pings, like Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, and Falconwrath Noble. With every creature that dies, you're just doing a little drain. It's like issuing a death with 1,000 tiny cuts. There are also some more powerful drains, like Jared, Kukusho, and Grey Merchant, who's just an all-star and should be in your deck anyways. Recurring Grey Merchant over and over again is just an amazing way to win a game. Kukusho also does a lot of work too. This is a fun category, and you can have some drainers in your deck. This is a category that fits really well with other categories. Let's put some +1/+1 counters on our team. Now, I mentioned Mazarek that puts a +1/+1 counter on your whole team. Why not keep those counters around no matter what happens with Rayhan Last of the Abzan? Or why settle for one +1/+1 counter when you can use a card like Winding Constrictor to add another counter? Winding Constrictor also has the added benefit of giving you more experience counters. Ooh, that I like, because experience counters are very important. But hang on a second, a lot of people are pushing for Winding Constrictor to be an auto-include in the Meren deck, but I want to take a step back. I don't think Winding Constrictor is that good. I would rather have a card that helps your engine rather than the card that makes your engine work a little bit better. See, if I have a couple cards that maybe get me those 1, 2, 3 experience counters, I'm going to be way happier than having Winding Constrictor that just, I don't know, makes it go a little bit faster, get a little bit bigger. But if you're going +1/+1 counter strategy, I think it's great to have the Winding Constrictor in there. And Corpsejack Menace, which goes crazy with counters, giving you a ton more than you can ever imagine. More +1/+1 counter synergy with Sacrifice synergy. Michaeloth, Bloodspore, Thrynax both have Devour, giving you those critical sacrifice outlets and +1/+1 counters and dudes. I love it. And Fertilid also is kind of a sacrifice outlet on him, allowing you to ramp. If you're going deep with +1/+1 counters, you can also go infinite with Triskelion and Mikaeus. Mikaeus' wonderful Undying ability gives Triskelion just enough +1/+1 counters to kill everyone. Walking Ballista can also do a fair imitation if we have something like a Winding Constrictor on the battlefield. And Walking Ballista is a good place to put infinite mana if you just happen to have that lying around. Let's go with an Eldrazi theme. Now, I mentioned Smothering Abomination and Matter Reshaper already in this video, and they're great. I particularly like Smothering Abomination. So why not go a little bit deeper in terms of Eldrazi? Eldrazi Spawn and Eldrazi Scions are great in this deck because they let you build experience very quickly while casting bigger spells. So a card like From Beyond that gives us an Eldrazi Scion every turn is amazing, and Awakening Zone, which gives us a spawn every turn, is just as good. I also like From Beyond because you can sacrifice it in the late game to get that game-winning Eldrazi. But we're not just going to be sacrificing Spawn and Scions, we're going to be sacrificing other creatures. So let's get Spawns and Scions out of them with Sifter of Skulls and Pawn of Ulamog. Another great inclusion in terms of scions is this Catacomb Sifter. Just a simple dude, gives us one little scion, but lets us scry, searching for those game-winning cards we need. Speaking of those big game-winning Eldrazi, how about this horrifying-looking Eldrazi boar, Decimator of Provinces? This does a fair imitation of Craterhoof Behemoth, giving your team +2/+2 and trample, and being a gigantic, horrible monster himself. The emerge cost is interesting in case you need to sacrifice something and still gain experience. I don't know. But the downside of Decimator is that you have to cast him to get the trigger. So getting him right back onto the battlefield with Meren might not be exactly what you want. Because Meren, by the way, can get up to 10, 11, 12 experience counters on her very, very easily. But let's take a look at Worldbreaker. Worldbreaker is great because it gives you a lot of flexibility. You exile target artifact, enchantment, or land, and then you can sacrifice Worldbreaker and then do it all over again, making sort of a chain of breaking worlds. And there are a lot of other Eldrazi too that you can use as finishers. These are just a few that were interesting. I think an Eldrazi strategy could be really cool and particularly powerful. We could also go heavy into the artifacts and have an artifact theme in this Golgari deck, which in my mind is really interesting because green-black artifacts is not something you typically think of. Now, there is a general that does green-black artifacts, and that's Glissa the Traitor. And you can steal a lot from her deck and incorporate that into an Artifacts Meren deck. And Glissa can be an excellent lieutenant. You can also steal Treasure Keeper, which we found to be a great inclusion in the normal Meren deck for this one. Let's just throw in a Solemn Simulacrum while we're at it too. But for added value, let's go with Scrap Trawler. Whenever any other artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you just get an artifact that costs less than it straight back to your hand. So it's just value on top of value on top of value. There are a lot of artifacts that are going to go great in this strategy, but a few I'd want to mention are Moriok Replica, which will draw you 2 cards and lose 2 life. It's an artifact, it's a creature, and a sacrifice outlet, all for the horrible price of 5 mana. Oh, great. No, but it does a good job, okay? And along with that, Sylvok Replica, which can destroy target artifact or enchantment. And I already mentioned the Burnished Heart. Now, none of these are a great rate. You know, they're a little bit overcosted, but they have that artifact creature synergy that could go really well with this deck. There are a couple other good strategies, like this Syndicate Trafficker, which can sacrifice artifacts, and Kuldotha Forgemaster, which sacrifices artifacts really, really well, with the added benefit of getting whatever artifact you want and putting it straight onto the battlefield. There are also very cool draining effects. The new Marionette Master? Whatever. That guy. And Disciple of the Vault can sort of drain your opponents as you sacrifice artifacts for these cool engines. Let's talk about some of those crazy cards you can tutor up, like Myr Battlesphere or Wormcoil Engine. Both of these cards are great for sacrificing and recurring. I particularly like Wormcoil Engine, as you make tons and tons of tiny worms, and you keep getting this gigantic engine back again and again. You could also go in a token strategy. So I mentioned Michaeloth in the +1/+1 counters section of this video, but it goes really well in the token section as well. In fact, +1/+1 counters and tokens go really well together. Maybe we got a combination going on here, I don't know. But in the token section, we're going to continue with Endrick Sar. Now, Endrick Sar, Master Breeder, pumps out Thralls like crazy. But if he gets too many Thralls, he's got to die. But with so many sacrifice outlets, you will never come to that. You'll just keep sacrificing Thralls for value and never have to get rid of your Endrick Sar. Kessig Cagebreakers puts tons of wolves onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking, and trust me, your graveyard's going to be filled with creatures. And Hornet Queen is wonderful because it's a flying insect, and then you get little flying insects to attack people with and block. Also really great to recur. Let's pump those tokens up with Eldrazi Monument, Pathbreaker Ibex, and Creekwood Liege. Actually, Creekwood Liege, can you just pump out 3/3 black and green Wurm creature tokens while you're at it? Okay, that's cool, thanks. Now, the big behemoth in the room is Craterhoof Behemoth, and he really does belong in token strategy, but feel free to go with the Pathbreaker Ibexes, these other monuments. Other cards can definitely substitute for the hoof. Magic players, that has been Meren of Clan Nel Toth. That was a long video. That was a lot to absorb, and I didn't even scratch the surface of how many different ways you can build Meren. But hopefully, I inspired you for your own different ways. Are you going to build an Eldrazi Meren deck? Oh, that sounds interesting. Are you going to build an Artifacts Matter Meren deck? People don't have that. I mean, you could do a Drain token build. You could do a +1/+1 counter token sort of strategy. You could just go Meren good stuff. The options are endless, and this deck is super customizable. You can build it on a budget. You can sink all of your money into this deck, but you can make it how you want to make it, and that's what really thrills me about Meren. Hey guys, my name is Jumbo Commander, and I make Magic videos. If you like watching Magic videos, we should totally be friends. Why don't you subscribe to my channel, and you can see new Magic videos every Wednesday. I do a lot of EDH deck tech. That's why I'm Jumbo Commander. You see that? Okay, I will see you guys next Wednesday for more sweet deck techs. Thanks, y'all.